Hello, it's Andrew Eborn here, and welcome to another edition of the Andrew Eborn Show. And I'm delighted that my very special guest is Laura Gordon. How are you, Laura?
Great, thank you. How are you, Andrew?
I am amazing. And what I love is about these sort of backdrops. I go around the world and we see the most colourful, glorious backdrops that you have there. Talk us through that. Whereabouts are you at the moment?
Well, it's not very tidy. This is my home office, and so this side of it is a complete mess. And what you can't see is that there's actually a very interesting bookcase over there that's got all my kind of like reading materials. But yeah, no, this is kind of where I've been situated for the past 4 months of lockdown.
And how have you survived in lockdown? Because I don't know if you've been watching what we've been up to. We've recorded about sort of 500 different interviews with people around the world, from Australia to Zambia, and we've
Yeah.
been with the rich and famous and all walks of life, which is really fascinating. But they've all been coping really, really differently with lockdown. And what I find fascinating is just the different professions and what they've been dealing with. So how have you been coping?
So I've been very fortunate in that all my work I can do remotely, and Zoom has been probably the main medium. Zoom and telephone calls. At some point early on, we were all a bit Zoom fatigued. So we moved to, I do a lot of one-to-one coaching with business leaders. And probably about April, we had beautiful weather. And I said, let's just take this outdoors. So I want you to go out, take your phone, go walking. I'll go out, we'll go walking. At the end of it, we'll have had a fantastic one-to-one coaching session. We'll both have burned about 500 calories and we get fresh air and exercise at the same time. So it's kind of a win-win for everybody. So that I think has been the saving grace. The weather has been the saving grace. But I realise how fortunate I am. I live in a suburb of Glasgow in Scotland with my husband. During lockdown, I managed to acquire two new granddaughters.
Oh,
So,
congratulations! Best production ever. So
so yeah,
they're what they call they're what they call coronials, aren't they? Is that right? Or they?
well, yeah, could be, yeah, absolutely. But both of them born due lockdown, two little girls in London, and only last weekend did I get to go down and meet them, and that was really special. So I think that's been the one thing hanging over me, just not being able to go and see them. But we're just so fortunate, we live in a nice house with a garden, and we live with the countryside in our backdrop, and I just really feel for the people who are just not so fortunate. And every day we have counted our blessings that this is where we have managed to do lockdown. So yeah, it has really not been, in fact, I think it's been a bit of a blessing, in one respect, in that we saw it as staying safe as opposed to being locked in.
Yeah, and I think that's right. And what we also did, Laura, is to appreciate the sort of things that we took for granted beforehand. I mean, as you say, seeing your grandchildren for the first time, it must have
Yeah.
been very frustrating having been born during lockdown, but not being able to see them in person.
Absolutely. And also, I think, it did make seeing Molly at 11 weeks old, she had kind of turned into a real laughing, smiling baby.
Right.
Um, and the other baby, it was only a week old when I went to see her, a few days old, and she's still sleeping and like really kind of cuddle, like all snuggled up. But it made it really special just waiting to see her. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Certain things that we took for granted, like seeing people going out for coffee, going shopping. My husband's shielding, so we've not been in a shop. When I went down to London, I went myself. I wore a mask. I was surprised that I didn't see that many other people wearing masks, because from this week it's law in Scotland, in indoors in shops. And I got tested when I came back and isolated from him until the test came back negative. So really, we've been completely shielding, and but again, it's been quite a special time because we've been able to spend some real quality time together, have lunch together every day. He's a GP in general practice,
Right.
and he's able to do triage, prescriptions, referrals, everything remotely, which has been a real boost for us.
No, no, fantastic. As you say, in Scotland, it is very different. And I've had the joy of speaking to people around the world, and there are different approaches. I mean, we get some of the headline news here, and Nicola Sturgeon seems to have come out very well. Some politicians haven't come up particularly well on it. Tell me what the current rules are in Scotland and what the real interpretation is of Nicola Sturgeon's job. How's she doing in the ratings?
So, without being at all political about it, because we do have to be very careful, I think she's doing really well. She has really impressed me from a personal point of view, from a leadership point of view. Leadership is all about visibility and good communication. She has been excellent every single day at 12:30 without fail. She is there in front of the cameras. She's looking exhausted, that you can tell that the burden of it must be really wearing on her. And whether or not you agree with her politics, you have to take your hat off to somebody that gets up every day and stands there. And she's an amazing communicator. She's very clear, she's very articulate. There's none of this, what is the situation? It's very clear every time. She makes it very clear. And sadly, it's contrasted with Boris, and who has not come out of this too well. And it's a sad situation because we just have a dearth of leadership at Westminster at the moment. So, and it's not a political statement, it's a leadership. It's coming from a leadership perspective.
And you're absolutely right as well, because, and I've been banging on about this all the time, it is about communication, because if you have that clarity of communication, then people will respect that. And it's bad news and it's tragic and we get all of that. But what you're trying to find with the politicians, and I think a lot of politicians have come out very badly, and a few such as Nicola, as you say, and the Prime Minister in New Zealand, who's become like a hero in terms of communication. What happens is the communicators are those who seem to have come through it very well.
Yeah, and actually, you see in the press briefings as well, certain politicians, Rishi Sunak has come over really well and is clearly a contender for leadership.
And you're right, and the popularity in terms of the polls, they're sort of showing him more popular than Boris at the moment. He's obviously now just made all these announcements, which you just heard about, the sort of the rescue package, if you like, including encouraging people to go out and eat, what they're going to do for the arts and so on and so forth. As always, the devil is in the detail. But in terms of communication, he seems a lot clearer. And I think if there's a lesson to be learned from this about politicians, is that people are fed up with sound bites. They're fed up with stay alert, whatever that means. What they want to do is tell the information, but be very clear and consistent, and make sure that you also follow those rules and regulations. Because when you get people like Dominic Cummings and goings, and you have to explain that, it's something which it was an accident waiting to happen, wasn't it?
Yeah, we had a similar situation with Catherine Calderwood, the Chief Medical Officer in Scotland. And I think one mistake that Nicola Sturgeon made right at the start was not immediately kind of doing something swift to say, I won't tolerate this, that kind of zero tolerance. I kind of think that, she realised very quickly that the country wasn't tolerating it, and politically she had to remove her. Sadly, Catherine Calderwood was a really strong chief medical officer. And whilst we've got an interim one in just now, it's just what you've said, Andrew. He's not a great communicator, he just reads out his briefings, and there's no charisma there at all, and there's no connection. And I think that's really important, because Nicola has also done this. Same with the New Zealand Prime Minister, is it Jacinta?
Yeah, that's right. It's not a test, but yes, you're right.
And it's been very, very clear, and she has all the time been authentic and real and spoken from the heart. And she says, and it does come over really genuine. Every single case that I have to announce of somebody who's lost a family member, it really, it comes over really well that she's incredibly compassionate and authentic with it. And this is another thing that Boris just hasn't got. Nobody believes him, nobody trusts him. And I think, back to the whole leadership thing, I think trust is at the heart of leadership. We need to see that trust happening again. And when you look across the world at the leaders, that we've got in key positions right now, it's no wonder that the world's a basket case.
No, you're absolutely right. And what happens, and this brings me on to what you're currently doing in terms of coaching CEOs and MDs and so on and so forth. I mean, a lot of leadership, and one of the key elements is clear, concise communication and decisiveness. Now, some decisions are really tough to make, and we get that. But if people are clear and consistent, it's got to be helpful, isn't it?
Absolutely, and I think you know, again, you're going to think I'm Nicola Sturgeon's #1 fan. I'm not, but I think that she has behaved in a really, really positive way throughout this. She had to deliver the really difficult message to pubs and restaurants and hospitality industry that we were not going to be opening at the same rate as England, because she wasn't convinced that the science really backed it up, and therefore she's had a much more cautious approach. But all the way through, she explained her decision making, and nobody, I think that, you know, obviously only history will tell who's made the right decisions. Nobody knows at the time, but all you can do is, you know, as long as you can give good evidence for your decision making and be decisive and not prevaricating and kind of going from one to the other, then, you know, I think you'll get the confidence of the people. And I think she's managed to do that. So it's not a surprise that her ratings are really high right now.
Yeah, I think that that's absolutely right. Again, and I talked to lots of people around the world, in Montenegro and in Belgium and New Zealand, Australia, and you look at the communicators are the ones who succeed. It's a terrible, terrible thing, but there are lessons to be learned. And I think the other things that when you look at, and I've had historians on the show, when it's not the first pandemic and it won't be the last. When you look at what happened in 1918 with the Spanish flu, it followed the same pattern. And there wasn't a solution found in the end. It just died a natural death. And so what happens is you look at how they sort of handled it, the same sort of language and so on and so forth. But you look at how things are badly handled, and you can learn the lessons from that as well. And people always say history repeats itself, but nobody really learns the lessons from history unless they can consult experts such as yourself.
Well, what is history going to say about the American president right now?
Well, what do you think? No, I'll be interested. What do you think history's going to say?
I still feel as if it's a comedy show, that somebody's going to say this is all a joke. I can't believe that, you know, that he is taken seriously by so many millions of Americans. And I know many millions of Americans despair as well. I think that he's a parody. You know, it's like a comedy show.
Well, this is the problem.
Alec Baldwin could probably do the job better.
Well, and this is the problem. And I won. I mean, it was a token amount of money, but I won from the head of a network, media network, big. I won't tell you who, but it's a big media network. And I won not only that he was going to get the nomination, but also that he was going to get in. Because when the reason pollsters get it so wrong is if you ask somebody, I believe, for a view which they know is going to be not a popular view, people tend not to tell you the truth. And a lot of people underestimated middle America. And this is the problem, because if there's a narrative that appeals to that percentage of the voters, that's what's going to get through in the end.
So, absolutely. I watched The Loudest Voice about Fox News and how, I forget the name of the guy that set it up, was so instrumental in Donald Trump actually coming forward for the nomination. And it's frightening to think how people like yourself, Andrew, can actually shape the way of the world, shape the future. Because I think without the support of Fox Network, he probably wouldn't have got in. He wouldn't have got the airtime. He wouldn't have got the action.
So that's what happens. So if you know, and we come on to this because you specialize in NLP and you've done some hypnotherapy and all these sort of things about molding. If you know how to manipulate the minds, you control the minds, that's how you can succeed in business. And not just in business, but also in politics and various other things as well. And you say, what will history say? Well, history is written by the winners. And because history is written by the winners and you're molding it accordingly, it's a very, very distorted view of reality. And what I tend to find, and what I always advise everybody, is that we should, in this post-truth era, always question everything, because the reality is people basically look out for sources of information that confirm their own prejudices. And so you'll go to a particular news source, which will give you a particular slant. You talk about Fox, they give a particular slant on a story. You look at the BBC, you look at CNN, you might look at RT. All of these things will have their own particular slant on a story. And if you only go to that source, your prejudices are going to be confirmed in an ever-ending spiral, aren't they?
Absolutely. Matthew Side's just written a book called Rebel Ideas. I don't know if you've come across it yet. And that's exactly what he talks about. In fact, he goes as far as to say that the tragedy of 9/11 happened because people were not open to listening to different perspectives and diverse ideas. They didn't have any diversity in the intelligence agencies that would allow them to be open to that. And actually, history shows that it's diversity of thinking, it's being open to listening to new ideas, to listening to different perspectives, that makes such a huge difference. And I think where we are right now with Black Lives Matters and the whole diversity discussion that now businesses are looking at is very much recognising that there's been a lot of unconscious bias, and there still is. And, you know, we choose people like ourselves, people that aren't going to test and challenge our thinking too much. We go to news sources that aren't going to test and challenge our thinking too much. So I think it's incumbent upon all of us and upon business leaders, upon political leaders to seek out diverse opinions, to seek out different perspectives, different cultures, different ways of thinking. And diversity isn't just about gender, it is about diversity of thought.
Oh no, I think absolutely, and I would always encourage this: jaw, not war. If you can get people round the table who can give you those diverse opinions, and you think of things differently, you question everything. Don't just take the source of it. Don't just do the same thing all the time, but look at somebody else's perspective. And we're both trained as lawyers, and that's what you do on behalf of a client. You are effectively the paid mouthpiece to represent their best possible case. You may not necessarily believe that, but you can turn around and say, look, we can gather the evidence to help do that. Now, if we approach politics and crises and communication in the same sort of way, you can then look at the other person's perspective to see, okay, look, what is the argument? Why are people perceiving things in a certain way? And I also think that it's basically a misunderstanding. So often perception and reality are not aligned. So if you can dig deep down and sort of question everything and say, look, why is there this perception? Why might people be looking at things in a particular way? I think you get a much better understanding.
Yeah, and I think actually we have to start from thinking there is no actual reality. There's just everybody else's perception. So, when you start like that, your reality will not be the same as mine. However much we may have had a similar background, we're going to have different realities, different mental models, different mind maps of, what something really means and signifies. But, freedom of speech is all about, being open to listening to it. And it does trouble me, a lot of what's happening on Twitter just now, with J.K. Rowling, whether or not you agree with her views, is it right that she's being trolled and accused and vilified for speaking out? Is nobody to speak out if they've got different views, apart from what the popular ones are? So this is a real issue now for, again, people in your own line of work, Andrew, for the media, for communicators, how does a platform like Twitter react to certain people may get banned from saying something. It's interesting that Donald Trump hasn't been banned from Twitter yet. Just wondering when that was going to happen. But that whole freedom of speech thing, and then just encouraging discussion, but then as long as nobody's in danger as a result of it.
Yeah, and I think that's right. It is a balance, isn't it? Because the media will say in their defense that they're just a platform, that there is freedom of speech, but with freedom of speech comes responsibility. And you mustn't defame, and you mustn't be inflammatory, and you mustn't be racist, and all the different prejudices that normal protections of law should apply. The question is, should these media platforms be the arbitrator as well?
Maybe there requires to be some legislation around them.
Yeah, but I think that's right, because then when does it stop? Because they will turn around and say, look, okay, we can get some AI that can notify people when certain words are used, and that's why they, rather than relying previously, they used to rely on people reporting it, they'd have a look. Now they're starting to get these things, and people are getting banned on Facebook and Facebook.
Who's programming the AI? who's
Well,
making
that's the thing.
legislation? It does. It's kind of all kind of swings and roundabouts as well. Who's right and who's wrong. But you asked about the question about where Scotland is in terms of lockdown compared to the UK, and in terms of right and wrong as well. And I think it really. We will only be able to tell in retrospect. I think it's the same with a lot of what's going on just now, that only by looking back will we know what decisions were right or wrong. And it's a very, very trying time in history. It's a very unique time. It breaks my heart when I think about all the people whose lives have been shattered, not from getting the illness, but as a result of what has happened throughout the last 4 months. The economy, people being locked down, women being battered and abused, people with mental illness. It really breaks my heart to think about the knock-on effect of what's happened. So, why, and that's why I feel a bit embarrassed when, you say, how's lockdown been for you? And actually, I have no complaints. And I think that I really feel for a lot of people who have suffered a lot more.
Yeah, and I think that is right. And as I say, I've had the privilege, if you like, to speak to a number of people, and it affects people in different ways. And I think we've had a lot of advocates about mental health, and I think the consequences are going to go on for a very, very long time. And it is that empathy, if you like, is that understanding that we've had a very privileged, if you like, because we have the cushion of living in central London. I have a fantastic park which I can wander around. There are people for whom it's been awful, absolutely awful, not just financially, but emotionally, mentally, and so on and so forth. But also they've been trapped, and and they've just got no escape. And the worst thing is, and I've spoken to people who've lost people during this time. They haven't had an opportunity to say goodbye. We didn't have opportunities to go to funerals when those were taking place. All of those things, it brings it back home, because we get desensitized with the media. And you're right to raise this as a point. We get desensitized. What we look at is statistics. Statistics are meaningless for most people. Lies, lies and statistics. You personify that, put a face on it, and then all of a sudden it becomes real, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think also we're seeing quite a lot now in the news about people with the lasting effects of it. They're having to live, with the illness. That, just recognizing that it doesn't just hit older and vulnerable people. There are younger people as well. So it's far more widespread, and it is the lasting effect. It's going to be the lasting effect in the economy. We talked about Rishi Sunak coming out of this really well. That's just now. Wait till a few years down the line when it's all the tax increases and the cost of living is going to go up, inflation's going to soar. So we've got an awful lot of that down the line, and a lot of the business leaders that I work with know that we're really just at the very start of it. So whilst they may have survived the last few months, some won't, but certainly the ones I'm working with are. How long is it going to be before it just gets harder and harder and harder as businesses start to collapse and the economy does start to go down? I mean, we're looking at 2022 to 2023 to start coming out of this, talking it being deeper and longer than the last recession. So there's an awful lot of resilience required just now, which was, I'm trying not to be too doom and gloomy, because I think that we don't need that just now. But what I really find so inspirational is seeing how resilient so many of them have been. And I think that it does, a time like this does differentiate between true leaders and people who've just found themselves kind of leading businesses. But it is about the support, that servant type leadership, where you're looking after all the people around you, where you genuinely care about them. They're not just numbers, they're not just statistics. Companies are restructuring just now. Leaders are having to make really, really difficult decisions about people's lives, and they can't take it. They can't take that as something that just, it's not a tick box exercise. It's people's lives that they have to deal with. So it's a genuinely really, really difficult time, and they know that they're just coming into the worst. it's not getting better. So they need to be resilient, they need to be strong, and they need to, one of the things we talk about is putting their own oxygen mask on first, and
Right.
looking after themselves.
Yeah, and it makes a lot of sense. And that is the difference between politicians and the business leaders who you work with. Because I always say politicians are in the business of getting re-elected, whereas the business leaders, and it's not doom and gloom, it's about being realistic. Because you need to say, look, this money, it's no good saying, here's 1.5 billion. That's got to come from somewhere, you know. And I was talking to a lot of business leaders, and you turn around and say, well, okay, if we get a loan by its very nature, however favourable the rate is, we've got to at some stage pay it back. And if we don't have the ability to pay it back because we can't get the people in, then it's a very, very tricky situation.
So there's another great book. So I'm always doing, I read a lot. Simon Sinek, I don't know if you're familiar with Simon Sinek. He's just written a book called The Infinite Game. And he talks about an infinite mindset, and he talks about, in terms of business, in terms of life, about, working towards a purpose, a just cause. The problem with politicians is that the decisions by their very nature have to be short term, and it is about getting elected again. And so, there the divergence happens because they are only thinking about 5 years. In 5 years' time, there is going to be an election, and so this is the problem. Whereas, the business leaders are thinking much more long term, and whilst they need to make difficult decisions for now, is to preserve the core of the business for the future.
Yeah, very, very different. And as you say, that's over here in 5 years' time. In America, it's all coming up in November. So very, very interesting what's going on over there.
Comedy show continues.
Well, yes, and it is. It's that the ultimate reality is far more bizarre than fiction, isn't it? Fact is stranger, much, much stranger than fiction, which is extraordinary. And talk about extraordinary, I mean, you have had a very diverse career, haven't you? I mean, you started with your own business. You then went in as a lawyer, a corporate lawyer. You lectured and so on and so forth. What was your business when you first started?
So the very first business I ever did, I had my kids when I was 21 and 23, so I was quite young. I had an au pair agency. I set up an au pair agency and also a children's clothing agency, because in these days, you were really restricted to Marks and Spencer's and a company called Adams for children's clothes. So I did that when they were very young, and it was great because I could work from home. And then I went back to university. I had a psychology degree, but I went back and studied law and became a lawyer specialised in corporate technology and media, and led a team at a kind of mid-sized Scottish law firm. But then I taught corporate law, and I really did enjoy it. But then an opportunity came up for quite a significant position within the Scottish Government to lead an economic development initiative to create stronger economic ties between Glasgow and Edinburgh. And at the time, it was kind of laughed at. Glasgow and Edinburgh are arch rivals. They're never, ever going to work together. And the woman that's been chosen to lead the initiative had to be a lawyer to negotiate a peace agreement. So there was a lot of kind of jokes around that. But it was actually, it was really interesting. There's a recognition that that Scotland, the two major cities in Scotland, really didn't pack a punch on their own because they were too small. But if you could combine their strengths on the international stage, they could be quite competitive, as a single economic area. So we looked at examples like Copenhagen and Malmo, and around the world there are cities that collaborate and they're stronger together. And that was the idea of the initiative. So I was working very close to government for 2.5 years. Very interesting, and then after that, I just didn't want to go back into law. I wanted to move on and go into business, and eventually I set up my own company 10 years ago and became an executive coach and consultant for businesses. And the benefit for me was that as a corporate lawyer, it's always very transactional. Whereas this was all about relationships and building and sustaining, more kind of effective relationships where you can really make an impact. and I love it. And I'm very fortunate to be working alongside an international organisation called Vistage, whereby it's all about peer groups and leaders supporting each other. And I just bring in fantastic speakers for them, and kind of set the conditions for them to support and learn and challenge each other to be better leaders. So it's fantastic, and I feel that I am truly living my own purpose now, because it feels good, that way I've had a variety of different things that I've done, but actually this feels like the right thing. I've been doing this now for, like, with Vistage for nearly 7 years, and my own business for 10 years, and I realise I'm completely unemployable now. I don't think I could work for anybody, and actually I just love the freedom and the autonomy. And one thing, Andrew, that I love more than anything is being able to choose the people I spend my time with.
Yeah.
Because when you're in a job, you just don't have that luxury.
And they do say if you do a job that you love, you'll never do a day's work in your life. And that sort of principle. And what I love about the mantra of Vistage as well is that you're not just sorting out the business, but you're sorting out people's lives.
Yeah, it's all about the effectiveness of business leaders, but also enhancing the quality of lives. And so a lot of the conversations are around personal things, because you can't separate it. As a leader, you're that one person. So
when you're doing your coaching, and I understand within the mix you've got a bit of hypnotherapy as well, a bit of NLP. So that's
yeah,
great, glorious.
Don't tell my clients I use that.
Oh no, it's good. Well, I can tell you, I'm a member of the Magic Circle as well. So
Right, I read that.
Absolutely, member of the inner Magic Circle, no less. So it's
Wow.
but those sort of skills, if you like, and in terms of presentation, in terms of manipulation, in terms of understanding what's important, the psychology of a lot of things as well, is very, very key for business, isn't it? Because you understand that is, people talk about a life-work balance, but actually it shows, and you don't do it just for yourself, but actually your business benefits as a result, doesn't it?
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think, my ethos has always been around positivism and positive psychology. And, recently been reading, I write an article for the Herald, the Scottish newspaper, every couple of weeks on leadership. And, I've been reading Marcus Aurelius' Meditations, the kind of all about stoicism and, just that kind of resilience and how challenge makes you stronger, which is more relevant now than ever. And, I think that this has always been the type of coach that I am, is always kind of focused around positive psychology and, reframing and, not allowing people to just go down the self-pity path the whole time, because it's easy to do that. So, and I believe, I really strongly believe in lifelong learning. And I think that, having that open mindset and being able to take on new ideas and continue to learn, I'll never stop learning. I always want to read, I always want to learn more, and I'm constantly learning from my clients, from the speakers that I see through Vistage, and just with reading. And to me, that's that's kind of the lifeblood as well.
I think that's absolutely right. It is continuous improvement and development, and I think the more you have a hunger for learning, the more interesting it becomes. And people are fascinating, and you can learn. Whilst a lot of people have the same sort of traits, there's always a nuance somewhere. Whatever profession, this is what I've loved about, let's say, 500 interviews with every possible walk of life, is that we are the same underneath, but we have certain elements which are the same in terms of how humans respond to certain situations. But talk me through how, when somebody phones you up and say, okay, you're an executive coach, I like what you say, this is lovely, I'm going to improve my business, I'm going to improve my life, you're ticking all the boxes. Talk me through that journey. What would you do? How would you work with them?
So the most important part of my job is asking questions. And here's where the similarity, it's the skill set that we share as lawyers, asking questions. It's not about me finding solutions for people. It's about me bringing out of them the solutions that they have within them. Me telling somebody to do something, that's me using my map of the world. Whereas they have to come to conclusions themselves. So, and it doesn't matter who you are. You know, everybody has the answers within them. So it's about just asking the right questions. Another wonderful book, sorry, I always do this, but Marilee Adams wrote a book called Change Your Questions, Change Your Life. And it's actually for leaders to understand that as a leader, they shouldn't be coming up with the solutions for the people that work for them. The only way that they will be able to empower and help grow the people around them is by not coming up with the solutions, but asking the questions. And it's the same for coaching. So coaching is all about asking the right questions, delving deeper, going under the iceberg. You know, everybody has, you know, they've got the external perception, and you know, when you start digging, when you start going underneath the, you know, the surface, that's when you find the true person. And you know, you start to dig a little bit, and very often, you know, my clients will be very uncomfortable because there will be challenge as part of that, but growth is on the other side of kind of challenge and difficulty. So yeah, I say to them, it's not going to be an easy process, and you are going to be uncomfortable, and ultimately you're going to be answering the questions, not me.
Yeah.
But it is all about your growth. If you want to grow and you want to delve into your best potential, then coaching is a great way to do that.
And you're right, the Socratic method of teaching, effectively what they're teaching themselves, is by far the most effective. Is like sort of teach a man, give a man a fish and he can eat for a day, teach a man to fish and he'll eat for a lifetime. I mean, it works on that sort of principle, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
And now, in addition to your fantastic work, you're also on a charitable side. You're connected with epilepsy, and normally a lot of these things. I do a lot in mental health. I do a lot with food charity. Do a lot with various other things. There's normally a very personal reason you get involved. What was the main sort of reason you got involved with epilepsy Edinburgh? I think it was.
So I was the patron of Epilepsy Scotland for a while. But I don't, you know, I'm very fortunate in that I don't have personally any connection with that disease. However, I worked very closely with the chief executive, who became a close personal friend, and I recognised through her the challenges that they had. So if you are working with one of the large cancer charities, children's charities, you know, you're always going to attract funding because these are the ones that do tear at people's heartstrings. But actually epilepsy does tend to be personal. It does tend to be, you know, only people that have really suffered it or close to people that suffer it that would get the support. And I felt that my contribution could be a lot more meaningful to work with a charity that, you know, wasn't one of the main ones which attracted the support. So it was really just about leveraging my own network, my own contacts to support them. And because I believed in what they were trying to do, like really purpose driven. And you know, Simon Sinek talks about the just cause and being purpose driven, and they really, really cared. Everybody that worked there really cared, and that resonated. So it wasn't the most high profile charity, but you know, I'd worked alongside the Princess Royal Trust for Carers, which became the Carers Trust, and obviously with Princess Anne as the patron for that, that was a high profile one and very, very deserving. But I felt I could make quite a lot of impact working alongside Epilepsy Scotland.
Yeah, and I think you're right on that, because there's so many worthy causes, and sometimes it's the one that don't have the spotlight shone on them where we can make a difference. And I think when you're talking about life balance, it's not just the business side, but actually, without naff about it or twee, is you're turning around and it does make a difference when you can use whatever influence you have, whatever network you have, to shine a spotlight and to make a difference, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And you know, I think that you know, certainly a lot of patrons are looked at to contribute financially, and whilst, you know, I wasn't really there to do that, I was there to kind of shine a light on it through the networks and contacts.
Yeah, no, and a big difference. I always say it's raising money and stroke or awareness, and if we can use our position to do that, then that's great. And we all have our pet causes, and I think that's certainly a sort of helps with the life sort of balance. And finally, you touched on so many brilliant subjects, but a lot of people will be watching this and saying, look, top tips. You must ask her about some top tips coming out of this extraordinary situation. Hopefully, it's going to be a little while, as we all recognise. But what are the main sort of things that you would advise people to do so that they can prepare for the future in the best possible way?
I think that's a great question. I think the first thing is to not focus too much on what we can't control. You know, none of us have really a lot of control over what's happening out there, but what we can control is how we deal with things. You know, what's going on inside our own heads, our own thoughts, keeping ourselves fit and healthy. You know, doing everything that we can to do that, being compassionate, being kind to people around us. So these are the things we can control. There is no point in worrying about things that we can't control. And the other thing is that, you know, although, you know, we can talk doom and gloom about the future, which I try not to do too much. I know I did just a wee while ago, but, you know, when we can't, we don't have a crystal ball. You might have one actually, but I don't. I can't see into the future. I choose for the future to be positive. You know, to think about it all positively. So I know I do have a very optimistic perspective and a positive mindset, but I choose to have that because then I can live each day to day feeling better that day. And I think that is the most important thing, taking each day at a time, and only, you know, kind of worrying about the things that you can control.
You're absolutely right, and I've had all sorts of people from psychotherapists and so on, saying the same thing, to realise the stuff that you can change and the stuff that you can't, and the wisdom to know the difference. I mean, if you look at that sort of side, it's absolutely imperative, and it is that, as you say, it's being a realist. It's not doom and gloom. It's being realistic. And making sure that you question the different sources of information, so that between that you can actually prepare. Laura, it's been an absolute pleasure catching up. Thank you so much for being my guest.
Thank you so much, Andrew. It's been a delight. Really great. Thank you.
Look forward to discussing things further. Take care. Bye-bye. So thank you very much indeed to Laura Gordon. If you have any views on any of the issues discussed, or suggestions as to topics or guests who could come on the show, write to me at guests@octopustv.com. Don't forget to subscribe to Octopus TV, follow at Octopus TV, at Andrew Eborn. But in any event, do stay in touch. It's great to hear from you. In the meantime, be good, be safe. I look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you for joining me. Bye-bye.